You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions at theoptionsinsider.com. Gold, crude oil, corn, soybeans, and more. With so many tradable products, the futures options market can be an intimidating place. How can you possibly keep track of the latest trading developments across so many different products? Don't worry, we've got you covered. Welcome to This Week in Futures Options, the program designed to help active futures options traders stay on top of this ever-changing marketplace. Each week, we'll break down the top trades, hot products, volatility explosions, and much more. This Week in Futures Options streams live, so be sure to check out our live stream via the Mixlr app. That's MIXLR. Or join our live chat room at mixlr.com/options-insider. Whether you're an experienced veteran or a newcomer looking to separate the wheat from the lean hogs, This Week in Futures Options has the information you can't find anywhere else. This Week in Futures Options is brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. For more information and educational resources about futures options at CME Group, visit cmegroup.com/options. This Week in Futures Options is also brought to you by FTSE Russell, a leading global provider of benchmarks, analytics, and data solutions. For more information, please visit ftserussell.com, cboe.com, and cmegroup.com. And now, get ready to break down the latest futures options trading activity. It's time for This Week in Futures Options.
All right, everybody. That music means it is time once again for TWIFO, This Week in Futures Options, a program where the name says it all. We break down the week that was, and indeed still is, on the futures options side of the fence. So we'll talk, who knows, whoever's going to light it up this week. Could be energy, could be ags, could be metals, could be equities, crypto, you never know what's going to make it onto the show. That's why you have to tune in each week. And of course, remember, you like what you hear, this show, anything we do here on the network, and it's a lot, close to a dozen shows on the network these days. Make sure you keep rating and reviewing the content wherever you get it. We saw a huge influx of new participants in the markets and indeed new listeners to this program in 2020. We want to give them a home to turn to for reliable content in these troubled times. So those ratings and reviews really do help the new folks discover the content out there. Keep those questions and comments coming too. We do love to hear from you guys. And let's see who we're hearing from on the old program today. First, let's go out to the CME Group hot seat where I'm joined once again. I'm always happy to have him on because that means he's bringing in his hot little hands some fun new products. Mr. Tim McCourt, the managing director over there at CME Group and the global head of equity products. Throw a little crypto in there as well. Mr. Tim, welcome back to TWIFO, sir. It has been too long.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Thanks for having me back. Always good to be here.
And also joining us, usually from FTSE Russell Studios, he might be having some technical difficulties out there. Not surprising. There is a lot of snow between the studio here and the FTSE Russell Studios out there in the hinterlands. But I do believe we have him now, Mr. Sean Smith, the managing director of derivatives licensing over there at FTSE Russell. Mr. Smith, are you there, sir? We'll work on getting Mr. Smith figured out as we keep on rolling. Time for the movers and shakers report.
It's time to find out what's rallying on the light side and falling to the dark side at CME Group this week. It's time for the Movers and Shakers Report.
All right, everybody, welcome to the Movers and Shakers Report. This is indeed the portion of the program where we break down what the heck is moving and shaking out there on CME this week, the biggest movers to the upside and to the downside. Once again, the report is pretty much all upside this week. We had to struggle to find some dark side, but we managed to make it work. So, Mr. Tim, as our guest, I will give you pride of place. You get to choose where we begin our journey this week, sirs. To the light side or to the dark side?
Always a tough call, but as I'm staring out the window here, looking about 10 feet of snow in Jersey, and I think you guys have more in Chicago, let's go with the light side, inspired by the snow.
All right, I think we can make that happen. Let's go to the light side first. Number 5, you don't see this on the movers and shakers too often, but it's Brent, up 4 1/3%. Number 4 to the upside last week as well, up about 5.5%. Number 4, our old friend, the Russell 2000, up about 4.5%. It was number 6 in this direction, right outside the top 5 last week. Number 3, copper, up not quite 6%, 5.97%. That shows you already number 3, already up nearly 6%. Shows you what an upside heavy week it was. Number 2, lumber, one that keeps moving and shaking. Unfortunately, not a lot of options activity to really analyze there, but it's lumber, 8.61%. Number 1 with the bullet, Mr. Tim, is a product category I think you may be familiar with. Yes, it's Bitcoin, up almost 28%, 27.94%. It was number 1 in the same direction last week, up 14%. Good couple of weeks out there for the old BTC. A lot of that driven by Mr. Musk and Tesla diving in whole hog to all things Bitcoin, gobbling up about $1.5 billion worth of it and saying they're going to start taking orders for Teslas down the road in Bitcoin. All that, just Musk tweeting about it is usually enough to drive something. In this case, it drove it up quite a bit, almost 28% here this week. To the dark side, like we said, a little bit harder to find a bottom 5. Number 5 on the dark side, soybean meal, off about 0.75%. So that shows you how little was falling this week. Number 4, nat gas, off 1.12%. Number 3, corn. Kind of a quiet weeks in the ags as well, but corn off a little bit, almost 1.2%. Number 2, rough rice. Pretty much every week it's been a rough week for rough rice. It was number 4 to the dark side last week, off about 2.5%. This week, off about 1.5%. And number 1 to the dark side this week is Eurodollars, off 6.94%. A little bit of movement out there in Eurodollars. Let's also analyze what's going on from a vol perspective, our vol movers and shakers. Let's look to the dark side of vol first. It's interesting stuff. We talked about the Eurodollar just now. Number 1 volatility decliner this week is the Eurodollar April contract. Remember, different months are going to have different volatility movements, even within the same contract. That's why we break it out by month here on the show. Eurodollar April contract off about 3% on the week. So again, not a ton, but enough for the number 1 spot out there. Number 2, copper. Copper April contract off about, almost 3%, about 2.8%. And then the copper May contract off about 2.5% or so out there. To the upside, what was increasing out there vol-wise this week? It's our old friend Class 3 milk. It's been on the vol movers and shakers for quite some time. It was up about 3.6% this week. So Class 3 milk, the April contract, getting a bit of a lift from a vol perspective. And then number 2 was March. Class 3 milk March contract up about 2.6% out there. So vol increasing in the dairy and decreasing out there in Eurodollars and April. But now it's time to keep on rolling. We got Tim here. He's got some hot products in his hand. So let's get to it. A new segment here on the show. Time to talk a little bit of crypto.
It's time to explore the volatile world of Bitcoin, Ether, and more. It's time to talk about crypto.
All right, everybody. Welcome to the world of crypto, all things Bitcoin and everything else out there in the world of crypto. And let's focus on everything else for a second because, Tim, we like to have you joining us, but the reason you're joining us here this week something new going on in the world of all things crypto at CME. So why don't you break it down for our listeners, Tim? What did you guys launch this week? What's going on with CME Crypto, sir?
Yeah, always great to talk about crypto. I think I also like the new little crypto jingle that now includes ETH.
Just for you,
Monday,
for you, Tim. We put that in.
I love it. We, this past Monday, we launched futures on Ether at CME Group, which are tied to the CME CF Ether US dollar reference rate. And it's very exciting. It's the third cryptocurrency product we have at the exchange. Bitcoin futures, Bitcoin options, and now Ether futures, and the second token that we're introducing products on the exchange. And it's been off to a really great start. On day one, we traded 388 futures. And over the last few days, up through just about a minute ago, we've traded about 1,267, or actually 1,269 ticking in real time here, futures on Ether, which is great to see. Now, in case folks aren't as familiar with the contract that just launched, everything is effectively the same, except it has a different multiplier than Bitcoin. The multiplier is 50 Ether. So that 1,269 futures contract are worth 63,450 Ether. So when you break that down, that's having a great first few trading sessions. Really excited about the contract, and the feedback's been really strong from customers so far.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. This is something that you guys have been hinting at for a while. I remember I did a panel at a crypto event coming up on 3 years ago now, so it's been a while out there. One of our panelists were some folks over there from CME, and they hinted at maybe even then we were asking about when we would get the Bitcoin options back then. Of course, the Bitcoin futures were not even a year old at that point. And they were hinting at maybe they were looking at Ether futures next, even back then. So ETH has obviously been on the radar for quite some time. What was it that made you guys finally decide to pull the trigger this week, Tim?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, Ether is the second largest cryptocurrency by market cap and average daily volume. It's something that we've been having our eyes on for a little bit now. As you may recall, we introduced the CME CF Ether dollar reference rate back in May of 2018, which is a similar methodology to the Bitcoin reference rate, which now today pulls in the Ether US dollar transactions from Bitstamp, Itbit, Coinbase, Gemini, and Kraken. That represents about 50% of the Ether spot transactions that occur on a daily basis. And then when we look at the kind of motivation as to why now, we made the announcement back in December. And I would say the interest in the Ethereum network and Ether itself has also really increased over time. Since we launched the futures back in 2017 on Bitcoin, I would say outside of Bitcoin options, Ether futures has been the second most popular request that we got. We always like to listen to customers for product motivation. And then when we look at the timing, it's really the interest in Ethereum technology has never been higher. Ether is a little bit younger than Bitcoin, and it's had a remarkable, I think, track record its first few years in existence. And there's a lot of excitement in Ether, which is the transactional token on the Ethereum network. It's really shown signs of growing acceptance and appreciation for decentralization and DeFi. All these projects that are coming online, there's just been this upwelling of interest and customer demand in the things related to the Ethereum network and specifically Ether over the last several months, which kind of tipped the scales for us now as the time was right to launch the future.
You touched on the the Ether reference rate. You guys have this reference rate methodology that you use, obviously, for the Bitcoin reference rate as well. We still get a lot of questions about what goes into those rates. I know you kind of just touched on it, Tim, but let's hit on it again for our audience who maybe are confused. What venues are you aggregating to get this reference rate for ETH?
Absolutely. And the first critical piece to remember is the futures contracts on Bitcoin and Ether at CME are financially settled. So we're only moving US dollars tied to the price performance of the reference rate. We're not handling the digital asset, which has been a great way to onboard people into crypto because they don't have to deal with issues surrounding wallets or custody or insurance of that if you're an institutional investor. So it's certainly been a little bit of an easier on-ramp. To build that reference rate, what we do is it's a once-a-day publication of the US dollar value of one Ether token. And the observation window is from 3 p.m. to 4 p.m. London time. And in that 1 hour window, we take transactions from the 5 constituent exchanges. Those are currently Bitstamp, ItBit, Coinbase, Gemini, and Kraken. They submit their Ether US dollar fiat transactions to our partner, the index administrator, CF Benchmarks, formerly known as Crypto Facilities. And that 1 hour window is actually broken apart into 12 equally weighted 5-minute samples. And each 5-minute sample, they take the average median of the spot digital transactions in Ether, and then average those over the 12 5-minute windows to create the once a day official Ether CME CF Ether dollar reference rate. And that's what our futures contract expires to on the last Friday of the month.
And we're already getting the questions about this, Tim, so I'm just going to put it to you now. I know the futures just launched, but our audience, let's say a little bit deep in the weeds on the options front. They want to know when we're going to get options. I'm assuming it's not going to be quite as long of a run as we saw between the Bitcoin futures and the Bitcoin options. But are there even ballpark plans to have something in the works by the end of this year? Maybe let's give them some sort of ballpark they can sink their teeth into, Tim.
Mark, I think this is a record. 16 minutes into the show, and you're asking me for options on the.
I'm just expressing the will of the people, Tim. It's just the will of the people.
That's right. That's right. Usually we save this for the bottom half hour of the show. It's a great question, and I think certainly our focus is on developing the futures market for Ether, because our philosophy at CME Group is we do really need that underlying futures market to be robust for the options to sit on top of it. It needs to be able to handle not only the hedging activity, but remember, with options on futures, the options deliver the future. So the market has to be able to absorb the delivery of options that don't necessarily coincide with the futures expiration. So these are all things that we have to kind of wait for. We're very encouraged by the first few days here. Certainly, Mark, you and your listeners are not the only one bringing up options on Ether futures this week and the last few weeks since we announced the future in December. So we'll continue to work with the marketplace to see if it makes sense and when it makes sense. But certainly, with this being our movement into the second token, our third crypto product, we have a wider network that we're soliciting feedback from. Participants are really engaged. So I'm really looking forward to working with everyone to figure out what's next for crypto at CME, whether it's Ether options or something else. We're all ears. And I look really forward to continuing to work with people to figure out what they need next.
You heard it here from Tim. Dogecoin coming next at CME. I'm just kidding. Don't send your email into me. I'm just joking. But, you mentioned the growing crypto complex over there at CME. Even since your last appearance, Tim, which wasn't that long ago, it was back in the crazy year that was 2020, but it wasn't that far back on the old curve. But yet, even since then, we've seen pretty much parabolic moves in Bitcoin, and of course, ETH has followed suit as well. We've seen a huge influx of mind share, even from our audience coming in saying, hey, what's going on with this crypto thing? Now we're seeing the influx of hot names in the equity world like Tesla and Bitcoin kind of getting together. So you have two super hot, super volatile names driving a lot of attention, driving a lot of mind share out there. So what's it been like for you guys over there at the CME crypto complex since our last appearance here, where obviously crypto has just exploded and taken off since then, Tim?
It's been great. What's interesting is when we look at cryptocurrency futures at CME, now we have two, Bitcoin and Ether. Ether is getting a lot of attention this week because of the launch, but to your point, Bitcoin's been on a phenomenal run in terms of its growth at CME. So just to kind of throw some perspective out there, let's look at Q4. The recent quarter we just wrapped up at the end of the year. We had a record number of average daily open interest in our Bitcoin futures at over 11,000, over 55,000 Bitcoin equivalent in Q4. And that was up over 230% versus Q4 of 2019, which is amazing. And then if we look at the Q4 average daily volume, that increased to a little bit shy of 10,000 futures contracts per day, just under 50,000 Bitcoin equivalent. And that was up 106% versus Q4 of 2019. And the momentum didn't stop there. When we look at January of 2021 was our record ADV month for the Bitcoin futures, bringing in 17,549 futures contracts per day, almost 88,000 equivalent Bitcoin. And that was up 63% versus a year ago in January 2020. So, I mean, these are some real strong signals of momentum. And the one that we also really like to bring attention to, Mark, kind of your points around some of the institutional or corporate adoption out there is in December, we also had a record number of large open interest holders, which, to remind your listeners, those are those accounts holding at least 25 Bitcoin futures, which is the equivalent of 125 or more Bitcoin. And we had 110 large holders in the month of December, which was a record, and just continues to speak the number of people getting into Bitcoin futures, holding Bitcoin futures, using it as a primary access vehicle or hedging other parts of their cryptocurrency portfolio with futures. It's been a great run for cryptocurrency at CME, that's for sure.
Let's check it out really quickly for ourselves. Remember, listeners, you guys can generate these reports for yourselves completely free. You know where to go. CMEgroup.com/TWIFO/TWIO. TWIO also works. That'll get you. If you pull up Bitcoin right there right now, you can check things like the vol and everything else going on. Not a lot of options paper still lighting up. We have a listener question about this. We'll get to this again in a little bit. About 250 contracts on the tape. Remember, that's a 5x multiplier out there. So a little bit more than it looks like on the tape. In terms of what's going on, like I said, a crazy week here for Bitcoin. Coming into Showtime, we're at 48,435, up 10,420 handles, or about 27.5% just since Monday. So yeah, crazy town out there. If you're wondering what the vol is out there, by the way, on these contracts here, let's see the contract that has about, a little over 2 weeks to go. Has about 117 vol, talking about 116 for the March contract, and similar levels, a little bit less as you go farther out. So you're talking about a major tradable asset that has well north of triple digits from a vol perspective, and it maintains it. It gets well north of that. It's been up to 150, up to 200 at some times out there as we're seeing crazy moves, crazy spikes out there. So if you want to check out what's going on over there in crypto from a vol or anything else perspective, you can add crypto now to your TWIFO reports going forward out there. Speaking of going forward, we could spend a lot of the show. I think you guys have a lot to talk about with all things crypto. Certainly you have a lot of questions out there, but we got to keep rolling. In fact, we put a poll out before the show just to see what you guys had on your brain. We gave you 4 choices for what you want us to talk about on the show today. We gave you equities and volatility, crypto, metals, and energy. It was evenly split when we started the show, almost exactly pretty much 25% for each. Now it seems like equities and volatility have taken the lead with about 44.4%. Crypto number 2 with 33.3%, and then a tie for 11% and change each for metals and energy. So let's do what the people dictate. Let's go on into our next segment. It is time to talk equities.
It's time to explore the volatility swings, skew changes, and hot options trades in your favorite indices. It's time to talk equities.
All right, everybody. Never let it be said that the people don't dictate what we talk about here on the show. Welcome to the equities segment. Let's break it all down. Before I do that, I do believe we are finally joined, better late than never, by our friend, Mr. Sean Smith, the Managing Director of Derivatives Licensing, beaming in from the FTSE Russell studios. Mr. Smith, are you there to talk some equities, sir?
I am, Mark. Thanks for having me.
Glad we can make it work. Obviously, a lot of snow between yourself and the studio today, sir.
A lot of snow, and I think that was part of the problem, was getting some of the ice off the cables. But we're here. Welcome to the show. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Sean. Always good to be here.
All right, let's set the table here because folks like to talk equities, and equity kind of goes hand in hand with the volatility discussion. So let's start there. Coming into Showtime, we had RBX, which is, of course, the VIX of all things small cap, at about 32, a little bit north of 3/4, right? Almost 33. Up nearly 4 handles, about 3 3/4 points from last show. We've been talking for a while how small cap vol has remained kind of locked at 30 and above, and it's still the case this week. It's bounced off that 30 strike a few times and did so again this week, back north of the 30 handle, up to nearly 33. VIX, you know what VIX is. I don't need to explain it to you. At about a 22 coming into Showtime. And then VVIX, 115 at this show, puts it up about 8.3 from our last show again. And then, of course, VolQ is at about 22.5, puts it pretty much unched from where it was this time last week as well. So that puts that VIX to RBX spread, so small cap to large cap vol, at about almost 11. That's getting absurdly wide. That's about 5.25 points wider than it was last show. And the VIX to VolQ, so talking all things S&P 500 to NASDAQ with a little bit different. Remember, there's no skew in the vol queue. It's at about a half a point. So that puts it almost a little more than 4 points tighter than it was last week. So a lot of movement between S&P 500 and small cap vol, and then S&P 500 and NASDAQ vol. So a lot to unpack. But Tim, when you're not doing all things crypto over there, you also work a little bit on equities. By the way, how did you end up with the two hottest product categories at CME these days, Tim? Who do you know over there?
always a good question. I think some of it comes from the equity index background and lends itself to the alternative products that we have at CME, which include the commodity indices, cryptocurrency, which are indice-based, and our most recent, prior to Ether, we also recently introduced water futures on the NASDAQ Valdez California Water Index. So a lot of these alternative products benefit from indexation, which is a topic near and dear to mine and Sean's heart on the show. So they kind of go together because of the indexing, even though they may not see it from far away. And I like doing fun things. So, when they ask people internally, I'm always raising my hand and take on new and exciting challenges.
That's your problem. You're raising your hand over there all the time. And we end up, it looks like it worked out for a few over here. It's been a little bit of movement over there in equity land. In fact, since your last appearance, Tim, we got the numbers now for all of 2020. I think, spoiler alert, they were pretty good from an equity options perspective. Why don't you break down some of the highlights for our listeners, sir?
Yeah, so, equity options continue to be, very active, and options on futures continue to gain traction. When we look at 2020, it was great where we had kind of all the options up in the major index products. S&P always continues to do well, no surprise there. But I think some of the bright spots for 2020, which are continuing into 2021, is we look at options on the NASDAQ. In 2020, those options were up about almost 70% versus 2019, doing a little under 20,000 contracts per day. The Russell options on futures were up 20% for 2020. But what's really exciting about the Russell 2000 options on futures is they are kind of on fire with the rest of the Russell complex here in 2021, where they're already in 2021. The options are up over 100% for the month of January, coming in at almost 6,000 contracts per day in terms of the options on futures. And that's almost, again, doubling the 2020 year-to-date average daily volume for Russell 2000 options, which is a great story. And I think some of what we've been talking about at CME, and I think this holds true for options on futures as well as the futures, as we head into 2021, index choice matters. These are becoming fundamentally different types of indices that track different types of the U.S. economy and are benchmarked differently, with the S&P 500 and Russell 1 looking at the large cap space, NASDAQ 100 having a different personality that's even outperformed some of the other broad-based large cap. And then you have the Russell 2, which is the small cap sector of the U.S. economy, which is going to behave very differently, very interestingly here as we head into some of the legislative agenda changes in the U.S. So that's kind of my 2 cents is index choice matters, and options and futures are a great way to take advantage of some of the different personalities and performance that these indices deliver.
And Sean, things have obviously been lighting it up, I think, to put it mildly, out there in small cap land as well. In fact, an interesting new sub-segment of the Russell 2000, which I never even thought of it in these terms, but it makes sense. You guys call it the MICROCAP index. So the bottom 1,000 stocks of the Russell 2000, effectively the bottom half of the Russell 2000, aka the smallest names in the small caps. We're blowing the doors off last month as well. The numbers are in for January. I mean, we know the Russell 2000 was already up 5% for January, so that already was the leading major index out there. Now you take a subset of that out, you take the bottom half of that, and that was up 14%, Sean. So apparently the smaller it is, the more it was up in January, sir.
Really interesting. It's the Russell 2000, right? It's the small, and then the smaller caps, which have tremendously outperformed, which is the Russell 2000. It's that small cap index. And we've been talking for weeks now through Q4 of last year and this year is how the Russell 2000 has been outperforming all major benchmarks, and it continues to do that. And now you've got a subsection of the Russell 2000 outperforming the overall Russell 2000. So it's exciting. And as Tim mentioned, in options, volumes have grown across the board. You've got our partner exchange over at CBOE launching Russell mini options in March, which is very exciting. But again, back to the options order flow and the numbers doubling at CME Group, it's the volatility. It's that healthy volatility, and it's that tradable volume that you get at CME Group that enables investors and those that want to take a position in options have that ability to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Sean, the other thing I would add too is this, specifically for the Russell 2000, it's not just an option story. When we look at the future side of the fence here in January, futures are also in fuego, so to speak, where we look at the micro E-mini Russells, and those are doing almost 200,000 micros per day, which has doubled the year-to-date average daily volume in 2020 and the December monthly volume. These are only trading a little less than 100,000 in the month of December, and now the micro is trading between 190 and 200,000 per day in January and holding strong. And you look at their older sibling, the Russell 2000 E-mini, that's relatively flat in terms of average daily volume, trading 200,000 futures as well. But when you look at some of the other major index properties, they're down a little bit in January. So on a relative basis, the E-mini is also outperforming some of the other E-minis when we look at the Russell. So this is a Russell 2000 story for sure here in January. And I think people are getting involved and finally, picking up what Sean and I have been putting down for years, which is we love the Russell, right? It's a great index to trade. It's a great representation of a unique part of the U.S. economy. And I think it's only going to become more and more focused over the next few months here as we get some concrete actions out of the new administration.
Absolutely. Fiscal stimulus, the bump in healthcare due to vaccine acceleration, it all bodes well for U.S. domestic stocks. You have regional assistance with these smaller companies as well. I'm going to just take Illinois in as an example. There's lots of Illinois stimulus going on with small companies here, and I wouldn't be surprised if we look across the nation that states are taking smaller companies under their wings as well to employ more people to get the economy going in their states. So this all bodes well for those micro caps, and along with the Russell 2000. Another good point is the open interest. We keep talking about volumes of futures, and you're absolutely right, Tim. But futures and options open interest continues to grow in this product at CME Group. So it's really exciting to see.
Yeah, let's talk about some of those numbers right now. And you're right, the numbers are trending north yet again. And it is funny, Tim, to your point earlier about how many people seem to have suddenly awakened to small cap. And we talk small cap a lot here on the show, but that's kind of what our job is, to talk about all these things that are trading. It seems like outside of this program, we had so many different people hitting us up starting in November. Really, it seems like the market collectively awakened to small caps, and then it kind of took off from there. We had folks like Matt and others at Orats who don't traditionally talk small caps hitting us up saying, have you seen these 5 Delta calls over here in Russell 2000? They're off the charts. And others on our network, doing other shows about that don't usually and traditionally don't talk about small caps. So it does seem like it has captured the imagination. And of course, these numbers here in January back that up. Let's look at the options numbers now. And again, options numbers really growing out there as well. Almost 21,000 contracts on the tape out there in the E-mini Russell 2000 options, which is an impressive growth rate from not too long ago out there. Let's see where the lion's share of the action, as it is with most equities, almost 40% of that coming in the contract that's going away in about a day, the Fed contract. So it's kind of hard to parse that from an overall action and vol perspective. And then, of course, the week 3 that's got 8 days to go, I should say, has about 21% of the paper. Let's go out a little bit. Let's go to the March contract. It's got about a quarter of the paper out here this week. A little bit saner numbers to crunch out here. If you're wondering, by the way, Russell 2000 at about 2274, almost 2275. That puts it up about 44, almost 45 handles, a little over 2% just since Monday. Obviously up more than that since our last show last Thursday. The vol out there in terms of the March contract, almost a 29, about 2880, puts it up a little over 2 points. So again, pretty close to that 30 handle we were talking about with RVX, which remember is kind of just a front month aggregate out there. It doesn't really look at the months beyond that. So almost a 29 out there in March, still very frothy, still very volatile. In terms of where the action was from a skew perspective, last week, the puts about 15.5% rich. So very rich last week. And this week, even richer, 16.4%. So the bid increases to the puts. Again, we're getting pretty far up there again. So not surprising. The skew is going to rotate a little bit. We're going to see a little bit more bid creeping in to those puts. And again, Russell 2000 has outperformed almost everything else out there. So not surprising to be some put action, some put interest coming in. Calls last week, 10.1% cheap to the at the money. Now this week, they're 11.5% cheap. So calls coming in, puts getting bid. That's pretty much what you'd expect. You see this continued upside trajectory in a name like this. And that's pretty much what we're seeing out there. In terms of the most action, you remember for a long time it was out of the money puts that were leading the dance. And these days, for a while there, it's been far out of the money calls. Of course, 2,300 isn't that far out of the money anymore. And now it looks like this week, the most action was actually in the 2,300 puts going out tomorrow. So going out in one day, almost 1,000 of those going up already of the total of about 21,000 contracts this week. So the lion's share of the action on that strike opening pretty much all week for this in the money put strike. That is surprising out there. Doing most of the action yesterday, about 600 of that 1,000 going up yesterday. The rest scattered throughout the week. And again, all of that opening. So interesting stuff in the money puts. Not exactly what I would have expected, but again, we've learned to expect the unexpected out here in all things, all things Russell 2000. All right, there's a lot more to talk about here, even in equities as well, but we have other products you guys want us to hit on next. Don't worry, we'll get some of your questions as well, which we'll get to even more product categories. But in that poll, we also asked you, what else do you guys want us to talk about out there? And behind number one, which is still trending number one, equities. Number two is, of course, crypto. Right behind it at about 20% was energy. And that one's been moving a wee bit as well. So without further ado, let's go talk a little bit of energy.
It's time to tap into the deep options well of black gold, Texas tea, nat gas, and more. It's time to talk energy.
All right, everybody, let's do it. Let's break down everyone's favorite out there. Good old WTI, been in the headlines a lot of late as this protracted crude rally. Can it continue? That's what everyone's pretty much asking out there. You guys know where to find this product for yourself. CMEGroup.com/TWIFO is where you go for the reports. Then choose energy and then WTI from the drop down there. And then you're off to the races. Again, if you're like me, you could choose a little bit of select all. That gives you the full panoply of all the trading months and strikes. Again, it's a lot of information out there. So be prepared when you hit that button. Coming into showtime, WTI at about almost 58, 57.90. Puts it up a little over a handle, about nearly 2%, about 1.85% since Monday here on the week. So again, staying north of that 50 handle, not quite blowing through the 60 plus handle this week, but at least not right now. But interesting stuff nonetheless. How many contracts trading out here? Just a tick north of 500,000 contracts on the tape right now. So a pretty active week. A lot of folks waking up to what's going on out there in crude land. The most active contract this week was the March contract. Has about 6 days to go. 25.5% of the paper going up out there. Kind of hard to parse that. By the way, if you're wondering, that's a 28 vol over there on that March contract. So still pretty juicy, still pretty frothy. But again, kind of hard to analyze it with just 6 days to go. Let's go a little bit farther out and find a calmer, saner contract to sink our teeth into. Let's go out to DEES. DEES always does a fair amount of paper. It'll also tell us what a little bit longer term paper is looking like out there. And that's, let's see, DEES has about 13% of the paper. So it did a fair amount of contracts out here this week. In terms of the vol in DEES, if you're wondering, it's about a 29 as well. So pretty even trajectory for vol all the way out to DEES. It actually looks like vol peaks in WTI right around the April to June timeframe, right around 31. That's where it tops out, around 31 and change. And it kind of drops back off to DEES, back down to about 29. So a nice little curve with an apex in the middle of the year there from a vol perspective. In terms of skews, DEES out here right now, the puts were 14.4% rich last week. This week, 19.9%. So the puts getting more bid up, which again, if you think this is top heavy, makes some sense. The calls, 8.8% rich last week. This week, 8.9%. So the calls unched in DEES, and the puts are getting a pretty firm bid out there, which is kind of interesting. In terms of the most active contract out here this week, it was a pretty close race. It was the 60 calls in March that took it with about 16,300, but the 70 calls out there in DEIS were not that far behind it, about 13,300. So upside seems to be the name of the game. Let's go to the March 60s first, 16,300. The big day was Monday with 6,000 going up, about 1,300 of that opening. And then we saw about 3,000 on Wednesday, 4,300 today. So a lot more going up today. It seems like slightly biased towards opening, but a lot of back and forth. Again, that 60 strike has drawn a lot of interest of late as kind of the next yardstick, the next hurdle to overcome. So makes sense that 60 calls would be trading it up for size. I'd imagine a lot of the paper going up today, probably closing, but hey, we'll see. You got one more day to go out there. Then we go out to the 70s in DEIS. That was number 2, 13,300 of those as well. 70 sounds so outlandish, or at least it did not too long ago when we were struggling to maintain WTI north of 40. Now, when we're threatening 60, 70 makes a little bit more sense, particularly out by December. Monday was also the big day out there for the D70, 6,111 going up on Monday, about half of that opening. So opening upside, and name of the game in DEIS there as well. 3,000 going up on Wednesday, about 3,500 going up today. So another active day out there. And Wednesday was about half of that was opening as well. So opening upside paper in DEIS and in March. Interesting stuff because, that's been the story for a long time. Can the calls maintain a bid? Recently, that has been the case because the underlying is meriting it. Now it looks like some folks going all the way out to DEIS and saying interesting stuff is still afoot. You guys want a little bit of metals really quickly, so we'll see if we can squeeze those on too before we get to your questions. So without further ado, then, let's hit a little bit of the old metals.
Werewolves beware. It's time to explore the options activity in silver, gold, and other shiny things. It's time to talk metals.
All right. We've been fixating on silver for a little bit now, as it's been part of that whole short squeeze phenomenon. It seems like most of that has passed. So we'll go back to the big dog here, gold, this week, see what's lighting it up in the usual shiny metal you guys like to talk about. 1825 and a half, if you're wondering, that's where we are coming into Showtime listeners. Puts it up about 12 and a half handles, or about 0.2%. So not a huge week for gold really out there. In terms of the overall contract volume, about 135,000 contracts on the tapes. That gives you some frame of reference for where gold stands in relation to, let's say, WTI, just ticking over 500,000. It's the most active of the metals, but not the most active contract over there at CME. In terms of where the most action was this week, the March contract has about 12 days to go. And that had just about a little bit more than a third of the paper, about 36% of the paper on the tape. Since it's 12 days, it's close to our 2-week frame of reference. So let's just head out there and see what was going on. Vol-wise, if you're wondering, is that about a 15 in that March contract? Puts it down a little more than half a point. So gold vol, if you've been listening to the show for a while, it's a difficult trade in terms of being long it. There's whole shows to be done just on the saga that is gold vol. We have done that in the past with Eric Norland, the research team over there from CME, who's done some interesting papers on what's happening with gold vol. So I encourage you to check those out if you're interested, listeners. But gold vol, that could be a whole show in and of itself. Right now, it's at about a 15. And coming into, let's see, this show, we have the puts this week. They were about 2.5% rich, so a slight bid to those puts. That seems to have, a lot of it's gone away. It's about 1 point rich to the at the money now. Again, remember, this is a contract that has less than 2 weeks to go, so those numbers are going to be changing fast and furious. The calls about 0.8 of a point bid, so not much bid last week. This week, 2.8% rich. So they kind of swung. Last week, the puts were about 2.5% bid. This week, as the calls are 2.8% rich out there. So interesting. Maybe a little bit of upside interest fueling that. Let's see what the most active contract was out here this week. Looks like it was the 17.5 puts doing a little bit north of 6,000 contracts this week. So downside was where the action was out here in March, pretty far, about 75 handles out of the money. The big day was Monday, 3,200. The rest kind of scattered throughout the week. A lot of that opening on Monday. So opening downside put paper, that's kind of interesting. And given the fact that the skew came in aggressively, gonna have to wager that maybe they were blasting away at some of those out there. Drawn a bit of a line in the sand, saying if gold dips to 17.5, I don't mind picking some up It could make some sense given the fact that we were at 2,000 not too long ago. And it's certainly 75 handles below where we are right now. So maybe not surprising we're maybe seeing some put harvesting, even though these puts are going away pretty soon. So I'm not sure how much bang they're getting for that buck out there on the 17 half strike. Let's look a little bit farther out. We know in gold, sometimes weird paper likes to dominate the tape. If you like pretty far out of the money calls, we got some for you this week. Yet again, the 3,000 calls going up where else but in December, 1,415 times. So once again, someone's got an axe to grind to the upside. Looks like they were closing, though. Looks like they were closing out on Tuesday. They traded 1,400 of them, so all of them that day pretty much. And half of that was closing. So kind of strange closing interest numbers here. Also saw some closing on the 2,100 and 2,500 strikes, 264 and 714 of those. So maybe a funky rate. I think the 2,500, 3,000 makes more sense. 714 by about 1,400. That lines up 1 by 2 a lot nicer than the 264 out there as well. So some funky strikes. Looks like maybe a 2,500, 3,000, 1 by 2 being closed out there with maybe the 2,100s as a kicker as well, 264 times. Again, funky upside ratios and flies. That's kind of the order of the day out here in any given week in gold land. Seems like we're seeing someone take one off. Maybe they're thinking the 3,000 strike, maybe that was a bit of a bridge too far in December. What do you guys think about crazy upside in gold? Let us know. Speaking of what you guys think, you guys are never shy of sharing your opinions. So let's get to them, a little bit of your futures options feedback.
It's time for your questions, comments, and insights. It's time for Futures Options Feedback. Submit your questions at twitter.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, stocktwits.com/optionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com. You can also submit your feedback via our Options Insider Radio Network mobile app, available for iOS, Android, and Kindle Fire devices. You can even ask your questions live via our Mixlr chat room. So grab the Mixlr app or just search for Options Insider at Mixlr.com. That's MIXLR.com.
All right, everybody, let's get to it. A little bit of your futures options feedback. Tim, this first one is right up your alley here. This comes from BCL76. He says, love the show. Well, thank you. Love right back at you there, BCL76. He says, I'm also loving the big move in crypto. I keep looking at the CME options because I only want to trade a crypto product that has clearing standing behind it. He puts in parentheses, call me crazy. I don't call you crazy. People want something that's backstopped. That makes a lot of sense. That's one of the issues a lot of the large institutional players, and sounds like you as well, a BCL76, have out there in crypto, is that there aren't really a lot of centrally cleared options out there. So if you see these big run-ups, you're left kind of wondering if the other side of that trade is going to be there when you want to collect on, let's say, your 20,000 calls in Bitcoin when it's now trading 48,000. Oh, surprise, surprise, they're not there anymore to give you the other side of that trade. So that's been an issue a lot of people have been concerned about in crypto for some time. So I'm not surprised. I don't call you crazy, Beast. I call you very much sane. He goes on to say, but I don't see the volume keeping pace with the futures. What's up? The same multiplier, yet the futures are doing 20+ thousand per day and the options are struggling to do 200. Am I missing something? You think the same customers would be trading both? You know, Tim, this is a question we received a lot ever since the Bitcoin options launched. And they launched with a lot of fanfare and they got some volume and they kind of tapered off and they've been growing steadily ever since. But he's right. We do see a pretty large chasm between the crazy numbers that the Bitcoin futures are doing that you kind of pointed out earlier. And you know, the options for whatever reason seem like they're struggling to keep pace with that. What are your thoughts over there? Because as he points out, it's the same multiplier. You think a similar customer base will be trading both. Why do you think the Bitcoin options, for whatever reason, have yet to catch fire the way the futures have?
That's a good question. So I think when we look at the Bitcoin options, they're doing okay in their own right. You know, yes, to be fair, they're doing 200 ADV plus or minus. We've traded about 40,000 contracts since launch, you know, representing 200,000 Bitcoin over the last year, which is pretty good when you think about the numbers in aggregate. But, you know, options take a little while to develop versus the futures. There is additional gating factors for people to be able to trade options when you think about sophistication, when you think about account structure, account setup, permissioning, things like that. So I think we'll get there. I think the other thing, and kind of curious, maybe Mark, to hear your thoughts, is when we look at Bitcoin options, certainly optimistic they'll get to the same heights that Bitcoin will. A lot of times options can even trade more than other products, right? Just in terms of thinking about how people manage risk. But I think also when you look at something like the Bitcoin future underlying itself, that's got some pretty healthy price movement to it. So I think some of the attractiveness of options and other asset classes of trading outside or away from the money in terms of strikes, you see some of that placing of risk or trying to get some of that additional exposure. You're kind of getting some of those movements already just by trading the future. Even today, the future trading over 8%, right, in terms of directionality. So I think there's some of that too, where do you need to trade options right now, given some of the price action that we're seeing in the underlying future? Maybe, maybe not. So I think that's something to see. We saw some of the the open interest collation in the options around some of the optical strikes, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. Now you're hearing things about the 100,000 strikes, et cetera. So I think if the market calms down a little bit in Bitcoin futures, we might see some more of that establishment across the curve. But right now, I think people are trading the futures because that's working for them, but we'll continue to promote the option.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. The futures have a large degree of optionality to them already because they're moving around so much. So I think there might be something to that. I think the other point you raised is kind of interesting. I raised this before with one of our longstanding questions on this show, which is going to WTI options. People love to trade WTI, does a ton of paper, but for whatever reason, the listed weeklies never really do a lot. I think there's some behind the scenes issues for that as well. Like you mentioned, the brokers and how they surface it, how they get access to it. There's probably something behind the scenes going on with the Bitcoin options, whether it's the brokers, they're not surfacing it in the way they are the futures, or for whatever reason, it's probably something behind the scenes that's going on. So maybe a bit of a combo of the two, because you're right, the futures certainly got some vol. They give you a lot of bang for your buck out there these days. So maybe they get what they need from the futures. That's an interesting way, I think. What do you guys think? Are you guys trading the Bitcoin options? Are you not? Like BCL76, hit us up. Let us know what your thoughts on. Speaking of options, Sean, we got a question for you. This comes from Maeve. I do believe she's referring to those recent products you just talked about, which I don't think are live yet, but he's maybe asking, are there options on those mini Russell products? I do believe, like I said, she's referring to those products, which I do believe are launching March 1st. Correct, Sean?
That is correct. Our partners, Cboe Global, are launching mini Russell options on March 1st. We couldn't be more excited about them. And it's going to be a fantastic launch. As you know, the market, and again, this points back to CME, these smaller notional contracts have become extremely popular with investors, wealth managers and institutional clients as well. So it's really exciting to see. The nice thing about this is the hedge for these options will remain CME's Russell option, or Russell futures, I'm sorry. So I'm really excited to see this complementary product continue to grow the Russell franchise at both our partners, CME Group and Cboe Global.
Yeah, so to answer your question there, Maeve, they're already options. They're not listing a future. It's an option. And you're going to get them in your hot little hands on March 1st, so just a couple of weeks away. So you don't have to wait. There's no waiting. The options are coming at you on March 1st. So there you go. You don't have to wait at all. See, sometimes we give you the answers you guys want here on the show. All right, let's go here to L. L wants to know, what about adding skew to the movers and shakers report? Well, we have been evolving that report over time. As you noticed, Elle and everyone else who's asked similar questions, we have added the vol advancers and decliners, aka the vol movers and shakers, to that show. Sometimes it's hard to find a big vol move week on week. Sometimes you just don't get it. It's only a week after all. But we do add that for you guys because you guys like to talk volatility. We have talked about and looked at adding skew. That might be an interesting way to go, but also then the movers and shakers report is going to take like 25 minutes at the beginning of the show if we keep adding segments to it. But it is something we have considered. We're trying to find a good baseline benchmark way to do that that's consistent across various products, because otherwise you're going to get what we talk about now. You're going to get a bunch of weeklies going out in a day with crazy skew changes. And, that's not surprising and or informative and or interesting, really. So we'll have to figure out a way to filter out that noise to get some interesting stuff going on. So if we can figure out a way to do that, that makes sense. That isn't all, front month equities or something else that's just having crazy skew moves. Then we will do that for you, L. Just for you, L, and also everyone else who's written in and asked something similar over the years there. All right. Unfortunately, that music means we've come to the end of another epic sojourn through the world of futures options. I think we hit on pretty much every product category you guys asked for. You guys asked for equities and volatility. We gave you that. You asked for crypto. We gave you that. You asked for metals. We gave you that. We asked for energy. We gave you that. It is only an hour show after all, listeners. We can't do every complex over there at CME. But nonetheless, if you have a complex you'd like to have us talk about, analyze, parse here on the show, hit us up. We didn't get to lumber, for example, but there's no real options on that. Rough rice, same deal. Could have hit on corn, but it wasn't really moving that much, off 1% this week. So we'll try to work some ags in. I know you guys like the ags as well. So hit us up if you have a product or a complex you'd like to see us feature here on the program. And before we go, let's go back around the horn. Tim, we'll start with you. Obviously, you've already delivered us the goods in terms of some interesting new products just this week. But if you want to leave our audience with any hints, any teases of what they can expect from you guys, whether it's on the equity side, whether it's on the crypto side, hey, maybe even on the water side, Tim, what can you give them?
Well, I don't want to break with tradition right now, so no teasers. All our products are kind of keeping us busy right now. But again, keep those comments coming in. We're ears wide open in terms of what we should be focusing on next. And just kind of continue to remind people everything that you need, we have for you in terms of risk management capabilities. There's already a robust product and tool set available for CME. So just get involved and let us know how we can further increase your risk management capabilities. And next time I'm on the show, I'll probably have another great new product. I just don't know what it is yet, Mark. So we'll be back. We'll be back.
Keep those requests for new products coming. Tim isn't busy enough, so give him some new areas to work on over there. That means next time he comes on, we'll have something cool to talk about. In the meantime, of course, you know where to go. CMEGroup.com/TWIFO or /TWIO. Get you the reports. Then you can expand out from there. You check out the Fed Watch. Check out the research that Eric and Blue are doing over there. You can head on over to the equities. Maybe check out the water contract. Maybe something interesting afoot over there as well. CMEGroup.com for all that good stuff and a lot more. And Sean, you guys are cranking away a lot of research. It seems like you guys are in the catbird seat these days. Everyone wants to talk Russell 2000, even Russell 1000. The smaller it is, the hotter it is these days. So, Sean, if folks are intrigued by such things, where should they go? What should they do?
Well, before I say that, I'd just like to congratulate Tim again on the launch of Ether futures at CME Group. I don't need to wish him success. He's the stuff Tim launches just always becomes successful. It's uncanny. So congratulations there. And back to the Russell 2000, as we mentioned in the show, microcaps, the smallest of the small stocks, have really outperformed even the Russell 2000 as a whole. And we recently put out a nice blog on the subject. So if you go to FTSERussell.com/blogs, you can get some really good information. You know, a lot of your customers, a lot of listeners like to want to know what's driving small caps, and this microcap index is one of those big drivers in the Russell 2000, and something seriously to take a look at. So please go to the FTSERussell.com/blogs and just to the FTSERussell.com website for lots of information regarding small caps and large caps, so Russell 1000 as well. And Mark, thanks for having me on the show. It's great to be here.
There you go. Check them out. FTSERussell.com is the place to go. Give them a follow on the old Twitters as well. At FTSE Russell is the place to go. On behalf of Sean, everybody over there in FTSE land, Tim, everybody over there in CME land, and indeed myself, I thank all of you out there for downloading, streaming, subscribing, for asking so many great questions. Keep them coming. If you have a product, something else you want us to hit on the show, hit us up. We're not shy. You guys aren't either. Send them in. We'd love to hear from you guys. We'll see you back here tomorrow, noon Central, 1 p.m. Eastern, for volatility views. And it all kicks off again next week with the option block on Monday all the way through to Thursday. And another episode of This Week in Futures Options.
This Week in Futures Options is brought to you by CME Group, the world's leading and most diverse futures and options exchange. CME Group's markets help individuals and businesses around the world manage risks and seize opportunities. CME Group offers the deepest and most liquid options on futures across all asset classes, including interest rates, equity indexes, foreign exchange, energy, agriculture, and metals. For more information and educational resources about futures options at CME Group, visit cmegroup.com/options. This Week in Futures Options is also brought to you by FTSE Russell, a leading global provider of benchmarks, analytics, and data solutions. Investors in the U.S. and around the world are using FTSE Russell indexes to benchmark their investment performance and create investment funds, ETFs, structured products, and index-based derivatives. Many Options Insider Radio Network listeners will be familiar with the Russell 2000 Index. Russell 2000 futures and options are currently trading on the Chicago Board Options Exchange and CME Group. For more information, please visit ftserussell.com, cboe.com, and cmegroup.com. This broadcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and does not constitute trading advice or the solicitation of purchases or sale of any futures or options. The rulebook of the applicable exchange should be consulted as the authoritative source on all current contract specifications. You're listening to the Options Insider Radio Network, the home of the Options Podcast. For more quality options programs, visit theoptionsinsider.com or search for Options Insider Radio Network in your podcast provider of choice. Listeners can also access all of our programming through our mobile app available in the iTunes and Google Play stores. Select programs are also available via live stream at mixlr.com/options-insider. That's mixlr.com/options-insider. Don't forget to follow along with your favorite programs and submit your own questions for the hosts at twitter.com/options, stocktwits.com/options, facebook.com/theoptionsinsider, or via questions@theoptionsinsider.com.